Right, so yeah, so I'm just going to basically give you a sort of a roundup of sort of what we've been up to, and this will be more from my side of the project, and then I'll hand over to Julian for sort of his side of the project shortly. But obviously we've, as Matt has already said, and as everybody is very well aware, we've been fairly hampered this year by COVID, of course. So what I'm kind of going to talk about is everything that we've kind of achieved on the sort of the community side of things over the past sort of 3.5 years since we actually started back in July 2017. As Sue said, we've now got the extension to the end of August, but this seems quite a nice opportunity to actually give a bit of a roundup of actually what everything we've kind of done for the past few years. So I'm not going to spend too long on this bit, but just to give you the background again to Back from the Brink. I'm sure you're all well aware it all sort of kicked off in 2017. These conservation organisations at the bottom there basically became a new partnership called Rethink Nature, and alongside Natural England, they decided to work as a partnership and put together this programme of 19 different projects across England entitled Back from the Brink. And the proposal went to various funders, and the majority came from the National Lottery Heritage Fund, People's Postcode Lottery, and several others as well. And it's all about, you know, conserving our highest priority threatened species. The 19 projects aim to bring 20 species back from the brink of extinction, and also help over 200 more as well. And that's a sort of a flavour of some of the species that some of the other projects focus on. And it's all about working together. So obviously there's this partnership of 8 organisations sort of working together to provide that sort of integrated action and advice. And so, yeah, so we're all sort of hopefully doing more together than we perhaps could do individually. And it's all about inspiring people to take action for those species, to learn about them. So that's always a main aim of these projects, to actually you know, come and get involved and value these special species and places where they're found. So our project, that just shows you the map of all the projects, and you can look at this map properly on the website, and actually there's an interactive map, but that just shows you the spread of the different projects. And we're obviously based in the Cotswolds, focusing on unimproved limestone grassland. And it's really because, and I'm sure most of you know this statistic, back in the 30s, this particular type of Jurassic unimproved limestone grassland used to cover 40% of the total Cotswolds area. And now that's less than 1.5%, but that represents over 50% of the total stock across the UK of this particular type of grassland. And of course, when you get such a decline in habitat, you obviously get a decline in the species that really rely on it, especially those ones that really can't use other habitats. They're very much closely associated with this type of habitat. And our aims were to restore and manage a network of limestone grassland sites. These first 2 aims are more Julian side of the project, to ensure the recovery of these rare and threatened species. And then on my side, it's more about raising awareness amongst people about these sites, about these species, and get people involved, get them valuing these species, and hopefully coming along and taking an active part. And I know a lot of you have done lots of surveys and conservation work with us over the years as well. So my side of things has, as I say, been very much focused on you guys, on people, on communities. And so we've been doing workshops, you know, training people, whether that's volunteers, whether that's landowners, to help us then come and do surveys for our various target species. We run lots of different events, so we either go to community events or put on different little community events, but we also have done lots of walks and talks, and of course worked with schools as well. So I thought I'd just sort of a bit of a whistle-stop tour through some of these things. And I spent a little bit of time over the past couple of days basically adding up how much we've actually done. And it's really nice to actually take that time to have a look and actually see the numbers. And over the years, we've run a total of 27 volunteer training workshops. And these have been about teaching people how to identify and how to survey for our various target species. So we've worked with our partners at Bug Life to run beetle workshops, Bumblebee Conservation Trust to run the bumblebee workshops, Plant Life doing all the plant workshops, and colleagues at Butterfly Conservation to run both Duke, marsh rotillary and large blue workshops as well. So it's been a real partnership to actually get these workshops done, and they are, I have to say, all really well attended. There's so much interest, and although you obviously get a drop off of people who attend and who might not get around to surveying for whatever reason and just have an interest, which is absolutely great in itself, we have had a lot of people who have then continued to survey on afterwards, which is fantastic, really, because that's the help that we need. And as well as volunteer training workshops, we've run 8 landowner training workshops as well. And this has been about offering landowners and land managers the chance to come and learn about how on their land that they own and manage, they can actually do something for these various different species and these species groups as a whole. So over the past couple of years, and of course we had to cancel these this year, we team up with those partners I've already mentioned, Bug Life, Bumblebee Conservation Trust, etc., to run a couple of days a year where we'd run a day on butterflies, plants and bees, and then the follow-up day on bats, beetles and adders. And we have a classroom session and then take people out to a nearby site and start talking about the pros and cons of the different types of management and what they can actually do and what they could perhaps aim to do on their land. And the nice thing about this, and Julian may well mention this in his talk, is that these workshops have then led to follow-up visits with people asking Julian to go and visit their sites to actually get some targeted land management advice. And then of course you get the benefits off the back of that for the species when people really actually put into practice what advice they're given. So that's been really nice to see such good take-up of those as well. And so off the back of our volunteer workshops, as I mentioned, the idea is to get people surveying. So usually you do a workshop and then I'll offer people sites to go and survey. And this took me a long time to actually add up, but it turns out, and this still may be a bit of an underestimate, that we have done a total of 419 different individual surveys since we began in we started surveying at the end of 2017, and which is absolutely fantastic. And actually that doesn't actually include any surveys that myself and Julian have done ourselves, so there will be extras on top of that, but it sort of really shows just how important you as volunteers are to us actually learning about these species. So, I'm just gonna, again, whistle a stop tour through the surveys that we've done and some of the highlights. So we've done our workshops for our bumblebees. They're very tricky, these 2 species, to identify. So we've started with beginner bumblebee identification workshops and following up with intermediate. And then we've done some survey days with Bumblebee Conservation Trust, because it's a real learning curve to be able to identify the red-shanked cardabee and the ruderal bumblebee. They're pretty tricky. So we had some lovely days out at Cranham Common, and then after that, Sinead there with the CAP from Bumblebee Conservation Trust has led us on some survey days last year. And we were quite fortunate that we were actually able to get both Sinead and Richard from Bumblebee Conservation Trust out again this year to do some surveys for us and some of our volunteers. Once restrictions were lifted and to survey some other historic sites. And as I say, these are tricky species to get to grips with. So we haven't, and unfortunately, we haven't actually found them on our surveys. They are very rare and they're very hard to find. But we were incredibly lucky during one of our workshops at Cranham Common last year, I think it was, to actually find the ruderal bumblebee at Cranham Common. Now, this is not a site, not a historically known site, never been recorded there before, and that was pure luck, almost the first bee that Richard caught, and was fantastic to actually see. So although we haven't added many sites to the list, we have added Cranham Common, which is lovely. Dukes, we've done several workshops over the past couple of years, both for the adults to learn to identify and survey for the adults, but also to look for the larval feeding damage, which helps sort of extend the survey season. We've had a lot of people come out and help survey for Dukes, and we had a real push on surveys, which I know a lot of you were involved with in 2018. And again, we did less but more targeted surveys in 2019 as well. And we've had some good results off of that. And including several new sites pop up. So a bit like the marsh fritillary popping up at different places this year, the Duke has been popping up in different places over the past couple of years. Although this year, of course, the flight period was during lockdown. So unfortunately, I don't think anybody really got out to survey for them this year. But one of the nice, this is a personal highlight for me, was while I was doing an adder survey at Rough Bank, managed to spot a Duke of Burgundy just flying past. I think I must have dropped everything to chase after this tiny little butterfly, just to make sure it was what I thought it was. And I believe that was the first Duke at Rough Bank since 92 or 94. So that was really nice. I think I saw a couple in the end over a couple of surveys, which was really nice. And I think they were seen there last year, but don't know about this year. And we have a number of plants on the project, some of which are a bit trickier to survey for, which Julian has been doing with Plant Life. But for fly orchid, juniper and pasqueflower, we've been able to have Plant Life, Kath from Plant Life there standing with the clipboard in the top picture, come over and run all of those workshops. And we've actually, on most of the workshops, we do a survey on the same day. So that's us doing a survey at Barnsley Warren for pasqueflower, that's us traversing the hillside. And I think we counted 2,480 plants on that day. And then several people off the back of that went and did some other pasqueflower surveys for us. And we've done the juniper workshops as well. And since then, we've been surveying and basically creating an inventory of juniper shrubs, seedlings at both Painswick at the top there and Juniper Hill at the bottom. And so that's us looking at a scrape to see how many little seedlings, counting seedlings. And that's been really, really successful. And there's a big scrape at Painswick, which was actually created long before our project started by Plant Life, probably about 11 or 12 years ago now. And we obviously revisited that. And between us, we counted all the different seedlings and young junipers that were growing. And we counted, I think, 69 different new juniper plants growing in there. And similarly, over at Juniper Hill, a scrape that Julian created, I think maybe a couple of years ago now, the year after it had been created, we counted 28 tiny little seedlings in that scrape. And it really just shows how juniper can regenerate pretty quickly. It's a slow growing plant, but pretty quickly if you open up the ground underneath a female plant, or if you scatter seed. So that was really nice. And for our greater and lesser horseshoe bats, rather than sort of go out with bat detectors and walk transects or count bats at a roost, we've been doing a slightly different sort of monitoring study. on these species. So using this little piece of kit at the bottom left there called an audio moth, which is basically a static bat detector. Well, in fact, it actually records all sounds, and you can basically put it out overnight, and then you can download the data afterwards. So that's a couple of volunteers helping me put some out at Rockborough Common. So the idea being that we had been trying to see a difference between the greater and lesser horseshoe bats using some of the grazing compartments before the cattle go in and during when the cattle are grazing, because both rely on the dung of livestock for their dung beetles and dung flies, which they feed on. And we had Sonia from Bat Conservation Trust come and lead a workshop on a particular bat sound analysis piece of software, so that these volunteers can now help us actually look at the sonograms of the calls and help us determine whether we're getting more greater and lesser horseshoe bats using the compartments or not. And although there hasn't been a real statistical, obvious difference between before and during, we are getting use of the common by greater and lesser horseshoe bat, and that's just showing what a greater horseshoe bat sonogram looks like. So this is kind of what we're looking at on screen. And not only that, but it actually has allowed us to create a really comprehensive species list of bats using the common, which will no doubt be useful in itself. And then moving on to our beetles. So you may well have heard our incredible success, or not really my success, but the success for Rockrose pot beetle this year. Over the past couple of years, we've had bug life out at Stinchcombe Hill with Chris Wiltshire teaching us how to identify and survey for Rockrose pot beetle. I think in 2018, we didn't find any. In 2019, there was one found at Stinchcombe and I think 3 at Breakheart Hill. And that isn't a Rockrose pot beetle in the hand there. So that was as close as we came to finding one in 2018. But this year, we're obviously lucky that the restrictions lifted in time to get out and survey for this beetle. And Liam from Bug Life and Julian did a lot of surveys. And we had some really fantastic results. So over only a few surveys, more beetles were found at the 2 existing Gloucestershire sites, Stinchcombe and Breakheart Hill, than had been found across the 4 known UK sites in the past 150 years. So it was completely record-breaking numbers. And not only that, the bottom picture there is of the very first Rockrose pot beetle to be found at Rockborough Common for 35 years, which was spotted by Alistair Hills and his mum Helen Taylor while they were out surveying for large blue butterflies, and which was an amazing surprise and incredibly exciting, because we actually thought they'd probably gone extinct there. So that was really, really great success for this beetle this year. And then rugged oil beetle, which as some of you know I have a real soft spot for. We're currently surveying for that. We've started that this year, this autumn. But over the past few years, we've been running workshops with Bug Life, taking people out to then learn how to look for them and what they look like. That's us at Painswick Beacon, which is quite clearly one of the best, if not the best site perhaps in the country for these rare beetles. And it's been really fantastic to see how much we've been able to add to the knowledge about these beetles. So when we go out, we basically, we're just looking for them by torchlight, and we're grid referencing every time we find a beetle. Now the top left map there, just a little snapshot of known sites before we started surveying. That's not all of them. I think there was about seven known sites. And then you can see we've added those blue dots, which weren't ever known about. And I think to date, we have now added 12 new sites to the list, including 2 just last week at Cleve Common and Badgers Mount. So we're really hoping that Prestbury Hill might be harbouring some in between those two sites as well. And it's because they've been under-recorded. So not many people are going out with torches after dark in autumn and winter. So we've been able to really up the knowledge of this beetle's distribution. And then just that lower map just shows what we can do with that data. We can map it across the site and actually see where the beetles are using. So that's Painswick Beacon, and you can see the use of those south-facing ramparts where we actually find lots of them. And we found 143 of them last week, which was absolutely staggering, given that our best total last year, I think, was 59. So they are doing incredibly well there. And I wanted to just give adders a mention, because we have had a number of people diligently surveying for adders for us. It's been a tough task, this one. We've had Kate from Natural England run workshops for us over the past few years, always really well attended. And we put out these artificial refugia, and we look around likely habitat in the hope of finding adders. But I have to say, I don't really have highlights for this one, sadly, because they are having such a tough time that we haven't actually found any new sites for adders, sadly. We do have somebody who's been monitoring an existing site, but other than that, probably the sites that we are looking at, they're very heavily used by people, by dogs. And so we unfortunately haven't found any new sites for adders. But that's not all bad, because as we're surveying for adders, we're also surveying for slow worms, grass snakes, and common lizards as well. So we're getting records in for all of these other species at the same time. And that actually gives us a sort of a proxy for how good the habitat could be for adders if they could recolonize. So, so thank you to those people who've been persevering with adder surveys and unfortunately not finding any. I know it can be a bit disheartening, but it's still really useful information. And I'll just try and speed up a little bit, don't want to run over too much. But so that's the surveying side of things. But of course, I already mentioned, we go to various community events and run events to engage with new people, new audiences. And over the years, we've been along to things like the Cotswold Show, Stroud Festival of Nature. We've held events at places like Sudeley Castle and Painswick Rococo Gardens, and take along things like plants for people to take away and plant in their garden, or show people moths. All of this just to basically engage with people who might not necessarily come along to a butterfly walk or a moth night, and talk to them about how important these species are, and get them engaging with their local area and enthused about going out and discovering more. And I've also tried to do slightly different events as well. So at the bottom right there, that's us on our wild writing workshop last year. And this was basically sort of a creative writing day. And my uncle, who was a poet, was able to come along and sort of get us into the thinking of creative writing. And then I took us out to Roughbank in the rain, and luckily it stopped and we were able to sit down and everybody started writing. And if you came to the AGM last year, you would have seen the collection of poems that came out of that. And it was incredible, because I wrote a poem and I don't particularly like poetry. But it just showed how you could get into that headspace when you're among sort of like-minded people, and how creative people can be if given the opportunity. And this year we were hoping to do something different, about getting new audiences in. So mindfulness walks was something I was really keen to do, but of course that's been put on hold. And obviously grouping them together just for quickness, but we do a lot of walks and talks and school workshops. And it's quite nice just to see the numbers. So between myself and Julian, we've done 57 talks and 20 guided walks, whether that's with Cotswold Voluntary Wardens or for U3A groups. And also we've done some specific bat and moth nights, bat and moth events. So that's us top left there at Painswick Rococo Garden. And no doubt Peter Hugo is somewhere there talking to us about the moths in that trap. And we usually follow that up with a Moth Madness Day, where we've got moths on show for kids to be able to, and families to be able to look at. And again, it's all just about engaging with more people. And the school stuff hasn't been a major part of the project, but it has been really nice to be able to actually do some school workshops, whether that's getting like Gastrell's Primary School out and Robborough Primary School out onto, walking out onto Robborough Common, looking for Duke of Burgundy, going to meet the experts at part of Stroud Nature's initiative at the museum in the park, and working with kids on looking at adders and understanding their ecology, or taking out Cranham Primary School onto Cranham Common it was March, I think, but it was an incredibly cold day, and got them to plant loads of thyme and marjoram plug plants to help large blue butterfly. And every time we get kids out onto a nature reserve, of course, you know, they get really enthused and really, really keen. And I've also been able to work with Helen Taylor at Kings Hill School with her Eco Club. And we had hoped to bring them out to Roughbank this year, but unfortunately, again, we weren't able to do that. So it's just been really nice to actually look back and see all the different things that we've done. And hopefully we'll be able to do some more now we've got the extension until end of August next year. And I'm just going to wrap up by just giving you an overview of the numbers. So we've had 343 individual volunteers come along to either survey with us. So 127 individual people have carried out surveys for us. 130 have done other things like done the practical work with Julian, or have come and helped at events. And then the 86 people have also been trained on workshops as well, and may have gone and surveyed elsewhere. And that just equates to 976.5, to be precise, days that have been worked by volunteers. And hopefully that's where you can see quite how important you all are to projects like ours. And 473 people have learnt skills through our workshops or through our practical work parties. And almost 4,000 people, 3,885 people we have engaged with directly through all of our different events and work parties and talks and all of that. So yeah, it's been really nice to just have an opportunity to look back over that and see what has been done. So I'm going to end there now